People ring the patient gurney. Amy Cole, Dr. James Erickson's assistant, didn't understand why two of the men were here, nor why they proceeded down and were done anyway, with Jim's medical research lab. But it wasn't her place to question Jim, not that she ever would. He didn't question genius. Jim's usual anesthesiologist sat on his stool by the patient head, and Miguel said, "Ready, Dr. Erickson?" "Good," Jim said. His blue eyes alight in a way that still, after years of working as a tech assistant, made Amy's heart turn over. "Amy, start the run." She keyed the code on her console. The patient, a woman of 40, twitched slightly as the electric shock ran through the lead wires into her brain. Patients always did that. Dr. Wu, the physician present in the case, the patient developed medical complications. He watched closely. Her eyes widened slightly as she checked the patient monitors. This was Dr. Wu's first time, but Amy could have told her there was nothing to worry about. Jim had performed this procedure dozens of times in clinical trials. FDA approval would come soon, and someday Jim would win the Nobel Prize. Amy was sure of it. The small screen mounted beside the gurney glowed blue. Where was she? Instinctively, she moved from the base of the iron staircase to a surveillance position, but her back against the wall. A vast space, too dimly lit to see the corners, a warehouse, airfield hangar. As her eyes adjusted, she could make out empty pamphlets, some broken, scattered throughout the space. A rat scurried past her, disappeared into a hole in the wall. The wall behind her smelled damp. An underground storage facility, then. Abandoned? Her hand moved of its own volition to her hip. Something was supposed to be there, and wasn't. What? And what was she wearing? What kind of dress? She never wore this, full skirted with petticoats. Where was she? Who was she? Something moved toward her in the darkness. "Sometimes," Jim said to the strangers, "it takes a while for the patient to speak. Until she does, of course, we won't know where we are." The older of the two men, who'd been introduced only as Mr. Jones, said, "And what if she doesn't speak? She's been in a coma since the accident." Amy was startled by the harsh tone. Who were these guys? Never before had observers or even family members been allowed to view the procedure. Jim said confidently, "Oh, Letitia will speak." The older man's eyes narrowed, slits becoming slittier. "Well, we'll see, won't we?" Letitia's body suddenly rearranged itself. To do what? To fight. Why? She didn't know, but her stance didn't relax until the figure coming through the darkness resolved itself in a short, spindly young man. Hands empty, dressed only in bike shorts, no place for a weapon. 18 maybe, with ears that stuck out of both sides like the late King of England. Closer, she saw that he was albino, white skin flushed with bloody, fuzzy cheeks, pink eyes. The boy said, "Please, give me what's in your pocket." Never taking her eye off the kid, Letitia ran her hand over the skirt until she found a small pocket. She pulled out a thimble. The young man reached for it, and Letitia's first closed over the thimble. "Tell me where I am." "There," Jim said. "I told you she'd speak." "Not to much purpose," Jones said, confusing Amy again. He sounded, what? Somehow satisfied by the patient? That they were still confused? No, not satisfied, but something. Jim didn't seem to notice. He gazed at the smart screen, which remained solid blue. The patient's words had not been a clue. Why don't you know where you are? The mousy young man said. A mouse. Yes, he reminded her of a mouse. She didn't answer him, waiting. Please give me the thimble. Can't you see that the tide is coming in? She heard it then. A faint lapping of water somewhere in the vast dimness of the storage cellar. Tell me where I am. Oh, here it comes. A sudden rush of shallow water, breaking into waves as it hit the wall behind her. Letitia tasted salt on her lips. The young man gave a cry and wadded toward the iron staircase. Letitia followed. Her ridiculous dress slowed her, and she ripped it off, struggling to stay on her feet as the water rushed forward. Underneath, she wore camel-printed t-shirt and shorts, but there was no time to consider this. The albino was halfway up the stairs. How high would the water rise? She could make out a trap door at the top of the stairs. Was it locked from above? It was. The mousy kid turned to Letitia. I told you to give me the thimble. It's my prize. I won it fair and square. Letitia shoved him aside, pushed hard at the featureless door, which didn't budge. The water was a tsunami. Nothing made sense. She handed over the thimble. She touched it to the trap door and it sprang open. They both scrambled through, the kid slamming it behind them. This is not working, Jones said. And there it was again, that weird note in his voice. It's been half an hour already. I've read your work, doctor. The patient never takes this long to respond. No? The longest before now had only been 10 minutes. But time is different in the mind than what we call reality. You have 5 more minutes. This work is done in 5, or we're done here. He was ordering Jim. Jim made no response. Amy's unease grew, mixed now with faint resentment, and not only against Jones. She thought Jim shared with everything about their work. Sometimes when a patient responded particularly well, he took Amy out for a celebratory drink, and together they explored the possible implications of the revolutionary procedures. Those drinks in a nearby bar were important to her, even though the conversation never turned toward personal things. And he never so much as mentioned his marriage. Letitia and the kids stood in the forest clearing, facing a large house with bay windows, pointy windowed turrets, peeling paint, missing roof tiles, overgrown lawn, sagging porch, and an equally sagging, slightly ajar door. The albino's kid's ears were grown even larger and longer, and now he wore a waistcoat and watch fob with his bike shorts, a grotesque combination. Why, Marianne, what are you doing out here? Run home this moment and fetch me a pair of gloves. And fan, quick now. Then all of a sudden, gunfire erupted from the woods to their left. 48 minutes without another word from the patient, much too long. At Jim's instruction, Miguel adjusted the anesthesia. Sedating a patient was perhaps the trickiest part of the procedure. You had to blank out whatever light or sound reached patients' brains through their comas. Yet not make the sedation so strong that deep memory and unconscious minds did not connect, or that a patient could not wake up. Amy felt sweat form on the back of her neck and beneath her. Jim must have been nervous too, because he began to babble with a stranger. You mustn't interpret the procedure. You do know how this works, right? Of course you do. You must have been briefed. Suppose I just clarify you again how important this is, how revolutionary. Coma patients don't usually respond to DBS, deep brain stimulation, by waking up. But my procedure can wake them if you stimulate the exact right area of the brain, the master key to very specific kinds of memory, the memory algorithm by which we ordered the world when we were children. And do you know how children, how all of us, really, for our whole lives, interpret and construe the data coming to us through our senses, through stories. You have 2 minutes, Doctor. The stories we tell ourselves. That's what orders our reality. Stories define who we are, what we are, and what we believe. And childhood stories, those that were important to us, go very deep in memory, so are the key to recovering identity, which in turn enables coma patients to wake up. And the patient spoke. So loudly, Amy jumped, and the screen brightened into an image. There. Now we know where we are.
Why, Marianne? What are you doing out here? Run home this moment and fetch me a pair of gloves and a fan. Quick now.
Words gripped Leticia. She said them aloud before she knew what was going to speak.
How queer it seems to be going. Messages for a rabbit.
The gunfire erupted from the woods to their left. Leticia dropped to her belly and crawled to the house. Her camo matched the tall grass. Blood sprayed over her and the kid. She hadn't even had time to cry out. She reached the door of the house, pushed herself inside. She needed a weapon. But if the enemy already held the house... Wait, what enemy? Nothing in here uses a weapon. Wrapping the vase in a duvet to muffle sound, she smashed it against the shelf and equipped herself with a thick, sharp shard. More bullets hit the house, but now they sounded dim, like a nail of pebbles. The smart screen had brightened to a stiff image of a blonde child in a blue dress and a pinafore, standing beside a white rabbit in an evening dress. Jim said, "It's Alice in Wonderland. Common key to memory. Mr. Jones, you'd be surprised how many bright children internalize it. You were told, weren't you, that our DB can match illustrations from over 2,000 children's books as soon as a significant phrase is spoken. The most popular are Goodnight Moon, Harry Potter, books by Judy Blume, Roald Dahl." Jim cited a dozen more authors. Mr. Jones, if that was his name, which Amy didn't believe for half a minute, didn't seem to be listening. He stared at the image on screen. It was a little blurry, which meant that it wasn't for one of John Tenniel's original illustrations for Atlas, but rather was one of the AI that extrapolated from the Tenniel drawings to match the place in the story indicated by Leticia's words. If necessary, Amy could have sharpened and edited the image, but Jin didn't tell her to do so. Of course, no image that may appear on the screen is an exact translation of whatever Leticia is experiencing. It's merely the starting point. Memory isn't static or even reliable. In the unconscious, as in dreams, memory blends with more recent interviews, experiences, transmute. Be quiet, Doctor, Jones ordered, with such cold anger that Amy's mouth fell open. Even Jim looked surprised. The new physician, Dr. Wu, raised her patient, and the man with Jones registered absolutely nothing. His face might have been a ceramic mask, for all I could tell. And Jones said, "Get on with it." Sound of breaking glass. The enemy was taking the house. At the other end of the closet, she cracked the door. Now she could hear voices in the foyer below. Not adult voices, but not kids either. Some seemed to be growls, some squeaks, others chirps.
Well, it's got no business there at any rate. Go and take it away.
Sure. I don't like it, Your Honor, at all. At all! Do as I tell you, you coward. Bill's got to go down to the chimney. So they were going to attack after all, from the sound of it. They had a whole platoon. What? No time to think. Leticia returned to the window and eased it up, peered out cautiously. No one at the back of the house. Someone downstairs said, We must burn this house down, Letitia called out.
If you do that, I'll set Dina at you.
Dina? Dina who? The place would go up like dry kindling. Swiftly, she knotted a sheet to the linen-closed shelves. When she smelled smoke, she tossed an in the window and climbed down, expecting to be shot. She wasn't. On the ground, she dropped to her belly and crawled through the weeds to the forest beyond. When she rose, a lizard standing on two legs was staring at her stupidly. He opened his lipless mouth to scream, and she decapitated him with a shard of vase. Nothing else stopped her, or as far as she could tell, even saw her. The stupidest bunch of insurgents on the planet. Bunch of... what? The smart screen had been frozen for 15 minutes, just when Amy was afraid the patient wouldn't begin to speak. Letitia said loudly,
If you do that, I'll set Dina on you.
And the minage morphed. Alice, grown too large for the White Rabbit's house, scrunched into her room with her head pushed against the ceiling and her arms out of the window. Who's Dina? Mr. Jones said sharply. Jim didn't answer. Amy realized she didn't know the book quite well enough to answer either. And finally, someone spoke up.
Dina's Alice's cat.
This is what's going on in her mind. Rabbits and cats and giant children. This is ridiculous. No, sir. As I already explained to you, the book is the key. But it's not what's being unlocked. We can't see what's going on in the subject's mind because her own memories are coming to her filtered through the Lewis Carroll story. Memories of rabbits? I'm aborting this procedure right now. I'm afraid you don't have the authority. I was told that this patient is vital to national security, which is why we're not performing my procedure in my lab, and that nothing should be interrupted. I told you no such thing. Not you, sir, someone higher up. And Jones went rigid. Amy made the large effort to turn her eyes back to her console. This steeliness was a side of Jim she'd never seen before, hadn't suspected. And vital to national security? Why and how? Miguel, adjust the sedation again, level 6. It may speed things up. Amy?
Brain waves, memory algorithms, both holding steady.
Good. Letitia's body twitched as he said loudly.
I know who I was when I got up this morning, but I think I must have been charged several times since then.
And the screen responded with a Tinian illustration of a caterpillar seated on a mushroom and smoking hookah. A tiny Alice peered over the rim of the mushroom. Jim leaned over the gurney. Letitia, who are you? The screen image didn't change. Letitia said to someone in Wonderland,
I can't explain it, sir. I'm not myself. I can't remember things like I used to.
Amy nodded. So that was why Letitia's unconsciousness had seized on this story. Alice, too, had identity issues. Suddenly, the patient laughed. Alice and Amy remembered and not laughed at the poem. And Alice had despaired at her own mangling of the stanzas. The laugh was not Alice's, but Letitia's own response. If the caterpillar was no help, the Duchess was even worse. Letitia had stalked away from the mushroom, flapped away a peaky pigeon, and come to another house. This one small for even a summer cottage in a clearing ringed with trees. At the door, a courier in British Army uniform was delivering orders to a servant in livery. The courier said, For the Duchess, an invitation from the Queen to play croquet. The servant said, From the Queen, an invitation for the Duchess to play croquet. Code, of course. Coming in via a back channel. Which side was running the courier? Sides of what? Letitia risked a test. Behind a tree, she called,
How am I to get in?
Are you to get in at all? That's the first question, you know. A trap. Maybe. The door still stood open. Using trees as cover and never taking her gaze from the servant, she moved until she could see. Inside the cottage, a single room, dense with smoke, held a ginger cat and two women. A cook facing the stove, seated richly, a dressed woman rocking a baby. No other visible occupants. On the wall left of the door stood a wire croquet set. Balls and wickets racked at the bottom and wooden mallets upright in their slots. Letitia said to the servant, who looked more like a frog every moment,
What am I to do?
Anything you like. I shall sit here, on and off, for days and days. The mallet was the best weapon Letitia had seen so far. She wanted it. Just as Jim wished the story was speeding up, Letitia said aloud,
How am I to get it? What am I to do?
And the screen morphed to two footmen in livery. One on a fish, one on a frog, outside the Duttish cottage. A moment later, Letitia said,
There's too much pepper in that soup.
And another Tennille drawing appeared, the bad-tempered Justice rocking her pig child. Dr. Erickson, you know who I am. I demand to know who gave you orders to continue this travesty despite my abortion. Sorry, sir, but I can't tell you that. You don't have the clearances. Jim didn't answer. Letitia said,
Mind what you're doing.
What was Jim doing? Who was this? Mr. Jones, a national security issue? Amy didn't understand, not anything. Letitia darted toward the house, ready to take out the frog servant if she had to. He didn't budge. She ran inside and grabbed one of the croquet mallets. The two women presented no problem. Flabby and cumbered by long, bulky dresses, one grasping a baby, the other a ladle. Both wheezed, smoke and pepper filled the air. Letitia said,
There's too much pepper in that soup.
And back toward the door, keeping her peripheral vision, the servant outside. He sat immobile, gazed at the sky.
If everyone minded their own business, the world would go around a lot faster,
the Duchess growled.
This is my business,
Letitia said. She had no idea what she meant, but her words seemed to enrage both women. The Duchess shook the baby so hard Letitia cried,
Mind what you're doing!
The cook threw a frying pan at Letitia. Just missed her. Letitia grabbed the baby with a free hand, holding it against like a football. To leave the child will be murder. The servant never glanced at her as she raced past. Eventually, the path through the trees widened into a paved road, and in the distance gleamed a white building clouded in mist. Letitia stopped, looked down at the baby. Startled, she dropped it, and it trotted quickly back toward the forest, for the baby had become a pig. The Duchess's ginger cat strolled up to her and grinned.
This is my business,
Letitia said from the gurney, and the image on the screen did not change. Those words did not appear in Carol's book. It was, Amy realized, another declaration solely from the patient Jim's procedure, and that meant it was succeeding. Then another 28 minutes passed without a word from the gurney. Both Dr. Word's medical monitors and Amy's tech screen showed no change. The words, "This is my business," had not been significant enough to further trigger Letitia's memories. This must be painful. Anguished remembrances always surface so slowly. Amy surprised herself with her sympathy for this particular patient. Was it because Amy too had loved Alice in Wonderland as a child? Or was it because she knew, at some deep level, the painful implications of the fantasy. She glanced at Jim, whose gaze moved back and forth between Letitia and the last Tenial drawing on the screen. Back and forth. The drawing did not change. The cat said,
"Do you play croquet with the queen today?"
More code. Leticia searching her memories. The sequence wasn't there. She opted for an open response.
"I should like it very much, but I haven't been invited yet."
"Oh, you'll see me there," the cat said and vanished. T5 Division. Leticia abruptly remembered had a contract with Boston Dynamics for animal-shaped infiltration robots. Had it included cats? What was the T5 Division? What was Boston Dynamics? The answers were in the white building far ahead. She set off on the road, where it curved through a small grove of birches. She came upon a long, messy table set for tea. A large rabbit and a man wearing a top hat sat at one end, with a little boy between them. The child seemed asleep. Top Hat looked at Letitia and said, "No room! No room!" And on the table beside the rabbit, lying negligently amid cake crumbs and used teacups, was a Glock 30, a 9mm. She said carefully, "There's plenty of room." But the Top Hat said, "Your hair wants cutting?" More code. Words rose, unbidden to Letitia's lips, startling her.
"I think you might do something better with the time than waste it in asking riddles
that have no answers." Why had she said that? What did it mean? Then more words where she looked at the other man who'd become a large rabbit.
"Your name is March. Caleb March."
"So it is," the man said. And finally, a new drawing on the screen. The Mad Tea Party, one of Tenial's best. At the long table sat the Mad Hatter, a March Hare, the Dormouse, and a sulky, hungry Alice, wanting both information and tea. The image had been triggered with Letitia said, "There's plenty of room." But her other utterances were her own. Who was Caleb March? Amy glanced at Jim. From his face, she could tell that he didn't know either. Mr. Jones had gone impassive, his former show of temper replaced by something colder and deeper. Amy didn't know why she suddenly felt frightened. "You should say what you mean," Caleb March said.
"I do, at least. I mean what I say."
"Have you guessed the riddle yet?" Top Hat said. "No."
"What's the answer?"
"I haven't the slightest idea," said Top Hat.
"Nor do I,"
said the little boy.
"I'm in the well,"
Leticia said, and didn't know what she meant. "Of course you are," Caleb said. "You're well in that well." Pointless. They wouldn't or couldn't tell her anything. Letitia eyed the Glock, planning her move. When a quarrel broke out about changing places at the tea table, she took her chance. With one hand, she grabbed the gun. With the other, she raised the croquet mallet. No time to check if the Glock was loaded. "Nobody move." All three partners stared at her astonished. "You shouldn't talk," Top Hat said. And Caleb March said, "No, just act." And the boy spoke again.
"The Queen expects you."
But Letitia didn't answer. She backed away from the table. No one tried to stop her. Top Hat lifted the child, who was now a mouse, up on the table and seemed to be trying to put him in the teapot. Caleb March looked at her steadily. For the briefest flicker of time, he reported into her from the Moscow that she knew him. And then the memory was gone. "Have you better luck than mine?" he said. Now Letitia's words came so fast that Amy could barely follow. "I do, at least. I mean what I say. No, what's the answer? I'm in the well." All the screen images didn't change from the tea party scene. Amy's console verified that all of Letitia's words were from Alice in Wonderland, almost. "Dr. Erickson, look in the book. Alice said, but they were in the well. Not I'm in the well. I don't know if that's significant." "She's customizing Carol's words to her own situation," Jim said, his voice neutral. But Jim was never neutral. Not anything about him. His enthusiasm was one of the things she loved about him. To fill the suddenly strained silence, Amy said, "She's customizing the story more and more. It won't be long now." Letitia twitched the gurney and said levelly, "Nobody move." Back on the road, Letitia inspected the Glock, loaded and operational. She tossed the croquet mallet into a ditch and hoisted the gun when he had a holster appeared. She wasn't sure of anything. She neared the building. Turrets and battlements appeared from the mist, then a moat and a drawbridge. A phrase rose in her mind. "The most secure building in the world," Letitia snorted. The castle flew flags with heraldic designs, black shamrocks, spearheads, hearts. Two groups of people moved around on the side of the moat. Cautiously, she neared the door. Smaller groups, 3 gardeners, cardboard thin, who were busily painting a white rose bush red. And astonished, Letitia said, "Why are you painting those roses?" "Well, the fact is, you see, miss, this here is a white rose tree, but the queen wanted it turned red." And a second gardener appeared. "She turned the dormouse too, you know. And she had the March hare killed." But the March hare was alive. Letitia had seen him. Fog filled her brain. Just crept on little cat's feet. Whose words were those? Neither of the two people that Letitia was. Two people. The ginger cat strolled from behind the rose bush and stared at her steadily. Before it could speak, the gardener cried loudly, "The Queen! The Queen!" and threw themselves flat on their faces. The cat vanished. The procession approached from the castle, soldiers followed by dignitaries, and finally the Queen, who raised her hand to stop the parade. "What's your name, child?" "My name's Alice." But it wasn't, was it? "You're late to the game. And you lost your mallet. You will have to use a flamingo. Come!" And the entire procession wheeled in formation and turned toward the castle. Letitia walked beside the Queen, both last in the procession, which let her keep the soldiers in view. And abruptly they broke formation and ran toward the croquet game. The Queen said no more about Letitia's having to play, so she watched the game. It was chaos. Hedgehogs for balls, flamingos for mallets, soldier bent double on hands and feet to act as wickets. The Queen rushed around, shouting off with his head at anyone who missed a wicket. From the cat, the black cat, or at least its head was black, hanging in the air like the words of a teleprompter. Like what? "How are you getting on?" the head said. "I don't think they play it all fairly. They don't seem to have any rules, or don't play the rules any attention." "Well, neither does our side. But you're right. They are was. Don't lose your head, Letitia. To the Queen." Letitia. Her name was Letitia. Yes. The cat's head vanished, and the white rabbit rushed up to her, but wasn't he dead? His blood spraying over her t-shirt, her dripping blood of a white mouse.
Marianne, have you seen the mock turtle yet? Don't hurry. He's halfway through the song. I don't. No, you need to hear this. Hurry, child.
And he grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the castle. Letitia allowed it. She had a sudden, overwhelming, unexplained need to enter that fortress. Quick images on the screen in response to Letitia's words. The 2, 5, and 7 of hearts painting a rose bush, the Queen of Hearts addressing Alice, the head of the Cheshire Cat hanging in space, and then Alice, the griffin, the mock turtle beside a body of water, and 2 beasts shedding tears. Tiniel had drawn Alice leaning against a rock, much smaller than the 2 beasts, knees drawn protectively against her chest.
The mock turtle song is almost over, but at least you made it in time for the most important verse. Now listen and learn.
The griffin and a huge turtle stood behind an enormous boulder beside the moat, both sobbing. Letitia again drew the Glock. Neither paid the slightest attention to the gun, although the turtle stopped trying to sing through his sobs to say,
You have no idea what a delightful thing a lobster quadrille is.
No, I don't, Letitia said. Could these 2, or perhaps the white rabbit, be used to get her inside the castle?
What is it?
The griffin looked at her, suddenly had hard eyes. I think you already know. Let the turtle finish his song. He knows the words better than I do. Mock turtle, continue where you left off.
No, he wouldn't join. So they killed him, the white rabbit said. Killed who? Why, Caleb March, of course. You knew that, Letitia. Why are you so slow all the time? By now you should have realized.
An alarm sounded, loud enough to make the white rabbit clap his hands ineffectually over his ears. The ears were longer than his hands, and the griffin leapt up and cried, The trial's beginning, come on! And it grabbed Letitia's hand and pulled her along the path to the drawbridge. The mock turtle stayed behind, still singing his song of mooring. Nearly another hour passed. No procedure had ever taken anywhere near this long. Finally, Jim said, By now she should have come out of the coma. Realized who she is. Which only shows that this nonsense doesn't work. Did it? Amy had never seen Jim this worried. Yes, one time before, when he'd gotten a phone call that his little son had fallen and broken his arm. That day, Jim had let Amy finish the procedure underway on a research subject. He had been so pleased that Jim had trusted her, although, of course, their usual physician, not this unknown Dr. Wu, had been standing by. Dr. Wu raised her gaze from Letitia to Jim, but whatever she saw in Jim's face, no reaction showed on her own. Miguel fiddled with his instruments. Jones looked tense, his silent companion impassive as ever. On an auxiliary console screen, Amy brought up Lewis Carroll's complete text. It contained 2 more illustrations of Alice with the griffin and the mock turtle, a drawing of a lobster, and pages upon pages of dialogue. Alice critiques of the griffin's song, relates to her adventure from the time she fell down the rabbit hole, recites another parody poem, asks the turtle for the lobster quadrille song. Alice talks a lot, even saying outright things like, It's no use going back to yesterday because I was a different person then. Letitia said nothing, and nowhere in Carroll's book did Alice ever say, Killed whom? And Amy couldn't even know that Jim and his wife had a son. The drawbridge to the palace was deserted. The croquet game was over. The griffin and Letitia hurried down the raised portico and into the Rassel courtyard, where she halted so quickly that she nearly yanked the griffin off its clawed feet. I know this place. I'm Letitia. I know this place. Before the accident. What accident? Space looked nothing like the courtyard of a castle except in being open to the sky. Square blue and white pillars rose high, holding up nothing. Meaningless flags, statues, bright green potted plants stood against the wall. In the center of the shining black and white floor was a huge inlaid stele with words ringing a starburst. Letitia paused, trying to read the words, but they made no more sense than the flags. I know this place. Hurry! Hurry! The Griffin said, dragging her along. Can't you see the trial has already begun? At the far end of the hall, shallow steps rose to the space crowded with people. In the center was a raised dial, and there sat the Queen, seated on a velvet throne, wearing a judge's wig under her crown. She looked grotesque. Whose trial is it? The Griffin didn't reply. He shoved her onto the end of the bench, already jammed with strange assortment of animals and people. A dodo on the bench had turned its head to glare at Letitia in the defendant's box, looking scared to the soldier in dress uniform with hearts sewn on the sleeve. Shh! Keep mum, the Griffin said. Consider your verdict, the Queen bellowed. Not yet. There's a great deal more to come. Call the first witness, the rabbit said. Top Hat took the stand. He gave testimony that made no sense, not even mentioning either the defendant or the theft, but spending a lot of verbiage on the injustice of the title. The Duchess's cook and the dormouse followed, equally nonsensical. After each witness, the Queen shouted either, "Consider your verdict," or "Cut off your head." Neither command was carried out, although everyone looked uneasy every time she bellowed. Finally, the Queen glared at the White Rabbit and said, "Call the last witness, or I shall execute you on the spot." The Rabbit said hastily, "Call Alice." The two soldiers seemed Letitia, thrust her into the witness box. The Queen scowled at her. "What do you know about this business?" Letitia said slowly, "I don't know what I know. Although I know that I know it." "That's rubbish! Now tell the court what you know." The White Rabbit blew ear-destroying blasts out of his trumpet. The Queen clapped her hands over her ears, knocking her crown askew. The Rabbit bellowed, "May it please the court, here's more evidence in this letter." "Off with his head!" the Queen shouted. "But read the letter first." It wasn't a letter, but another poem, which Rabbit said so quickly Letitia couldn't understand none of the garbled words. He slowed and enunciated with clarity of a Shakespearean actor. "I sent them word I had gone. We knew it to be true. If you should push the matter on, what would become of you?" And the Queen turned pale. She trembled so hard her crown fell off. In a shaky voice she said, "Stop it! Off with the prisoner's head! Sentence her first, verdict afterwards!" "No, you can't sentence without it." "Execute the witness too!" But that was what the agency, or someone in it, had done, covertly. Killed Caleb March in Moscow because he had discovered the highly placed mole in the agency. And as the agency had tried to kill Letitia, it had not been an accident but a botched hit, before Letitia could push the matter on and implicate the Queen, who had been selling top-secret information to the Russians. Above the cartoonish velvet rope, the Queen's face morphed into that of a man. Peter Jurgens, Assistant Director for Counterintelligence, Central Intelligence Agency. If she could push the matter on, what would become of you? What would become of Jurgens if Letitia, CIA agent, had been able to transmit her intel before the assassination attempt on her life? Arrest for treason? Letitia drew the Glock, aimed at the Queen, Everyone in the courtyard rose up in a cloud to attack her, and Letitia fired and woke up. The patient's eyes flew open, and then before Amy could even register the Tennille's drawings on the screen, everything happened at once. "You're the mole," Letitia said to Jones while she struggled to sit up on the gurney. And even as Amy thought insanely, "But mole is in the wind, the willows, not Alice." Jones' silent companion drew a gun and fired at the gurney. Miguel, seated between the shooter and the patient, screamed and fell off his stool. Jones fired again, but he wasn't quick enough. With one hand, Dr. Wu was already throwing Letitia off the gurney, tearing the lead wires from Letitia's scalp and the electrodes from her body. And as the gun seemed to leap into Dr. Wu's hand, the doctor, armed, she shot at the gunman, who also fired. Dr. Wu collapsed behind the gurney. The gunman's chest blossomed into red, and he fell backwards. Amy couldn't move, couldn't think. More shots. One hit her console and went dead in a spray of sparks. Jones, staggering sideways, turned to aim at Amy's side of the gurney. To aim at Jim, who stood frozen, as if he could not believe what was happening. As if they were all part of Alice's dream. But it was real. And Amy could reach Jim, could push him down to the floor, could reach him before Mole's wobbling gun. He must hit too. He was going to fire at Jim, but Amy could push him, could save Jim's life, but she didn't. Her muscles made the decision without thought, without decision. She dropped from behind her console for protection. Flat on the floor, she could barely bend behind the gurney, where Dr. Wu lay motionless and bloody across Letitia, whose scalp bled from the torn-out wires. Letitia held on to Dr. Wu's gun. She shoved up Dr. Wu's body and rose to her knees. Amy could see the effort on her face. She'd been in a coma for how long, Amy couldn't remember. She couldn't think Jones was still on his feet, aiming at Jim and Letitia. Letitia fired, and Jones went down, falling so slowly as Alice going down a rabbit hole. And then silence. Silence didn't last. There were sirens, police, grim men and women flashing badges, forensics people examining and photographing the dead, and questions for Amy and Jim and Letitia, the conscious survivors. Miguel was dead. So were Jones and his gunman. Dr. Wu, a real physician, was also a CIA agent. He was taken away in an ambulance. And Letitia turned out to be another agent, refused to go out to the hospital and sat answering questions, her head bandaged by EMTs. It was all bewildering. Many voices, many questions. And yet nobody asked Amy the question she asked herself. Why she had not tried to save Jim. Not risked her own life to shove him to safety. She thought she loved Jim better than life itself, but she didn't. The knowledge settled onto her like a weighted blanket. And the blanket said she would never share with Jim. His wife was here now, sitting close to him, holding his hand. Every line of her body displaying her concern, devotion. And Amy couldn't hear the words to each other. But she could read Jim's face as she reassured his wife. There are many kinds of fantasies.